Let's talk about 80-20 analysis. When I look back at my year, and I do this in a very particular way, I will look at my iCal on my Mac, and I will start with Jan 1, in this case of 2016, and go through my entire calendar day by day. And this does not need to take a very long time. It really only takes certainly less than an hour. And I will ask myself two questions as filters at the beginning. And then I have a piece of paper, as I do right now, and there's a plus sign at the top of one column and a negative sign at the top of the other. And what I'm looking for is the following. The 20% of activities, experiences, or people who produced 80% or more of my most positive emotions. These are the things that I want. Positive emotions and positive outcomes, although they're not always perfectly correlated, right? So the 20% of activities, experiences, or people who produced 80% or more of the most positive emotions I experienced that year. And then on the flip side, you have the 20% of activities, experiences, and people who produced 80% or more of the negative emotions, the stress, the bullshit in your life, the angst, the anger, whatever it might be, that you would want to remove or excise from your life, or at least minimize. And I created my various categories. It turned out I did a very good job in 2016, much more so than in 2014 or 2015 at following my own rules. So what did this mean? This means that I had a lot more in the positive category because I'd identified patterns in the past. So I take these, I look at these experiences and then I try to spot patterns. What are the commonalities? For instance, in my positive column for this past year, I have a trip to South America to do an acro yoga intensive training course. I have a family trip in June, which was to Paris, where I took my parents to Paris for a month because my mom had never been. My dad hadn't been since the 60s. A ski trip to Montana with friends. An elk hunt, which was in Colorado with three very close friends. Didn't end up getting an elk, but that's kind of beside the point. And then the Easter Island trip with Peter Tia, David Sabatini, and Nav Chantel. And if you look at the commonalities here, there are a few elements. So I have extended trips off the grid, all right, meaning no social media, no email, etc. Physical component, some form of rigorous daily movement or exercise, and time with family and close friends. All right. So, and there are a few other things. If you looked at positives, looking at the negative space for the positives, no startup investing. So I followed my own decision to retire effectively from startup investing, which you can read about ad nauseum if you just search my name and startup vacation. And then lots of empty space. I'd blocked out lots of empty space in my calendar so that I would have the maneuverability and space to change direction or say hell yes to the few things that I wanted to, along the lines of Derek Sivers. All right. So those are a few of the things I did right. So this year now let me add one more thing. Before taking an action step, and I'll explain what that step is, I also asked a number of people very close to me, what do you think I should do more of in 2017 and less of in 2017? What should I do more of and what should I do less of? And there were some general responses that you could receive from multiple people, like do less of whatever you view to be a chore or an obligation. Okay. And we'll talk about how you might do less of those things. Now, on the positive side, they said teaching. Perhaps you should spend more time interacting with high school students. I enjoy that. And I've done a number of things with high school students. And I do things with high school students every year in some capacity, whether it's through Donors Choose or QuestBridge or Build. These are all nonprofits that I work with related to education. But a few of my closest friends have seen me interact with high school students and have observed how much I love that. So they said, you should do more of that. Next was live podcasts and Q&A. This was feedback that I got from friends who attended the New York City event at the 92Y and saw me do a live event. So one thing I am considering doing, and I'd love your feedback, guys, is having a podcast tour, taking my dog Molly, putting her in an RV, and driving around the US and doing live podcasts in some well-known cities, certainly, like say in LA or San Francisco or Seattle or New York, Miami, Chicago, Austin, whatever it might be, but also doing some more out of the way spots, maybe a few smaller towns in Nebraska or in Montana, for instance. So let me know what you think of that. The way I might do that is if anybody wants to take the initiative now, this is probably what I'll end up doing, is have people create Facebook groups for Tools of Titans. So it'd be Tools of Titans group Austin, Tools of Titans group Omaha, whatever it might be, Tools of Titans group Charleston, right? And then the people who are able, the organizers or groups who are able to amass the highest number of people or past a certain threshold, say 250 people or 500 people. I don't know what the number is yet, but let's just say it's 250. Then they go into the contenders list for these live podcasts. This is a very likely thing to happen, I think. Okay, next up was more sunrises. I tend to be a very late riser and late to bed, late to rise. And I always feel fantastic when I do get up for a sunrise. And that is not something I've done consistently. So that's another one. And then consistent feedback, more time out of cities in the country. So that matches up with the Montana, South America, the Colorado trip, Easter Island, etc. Right? So once you have these patterns spotted after doing this positive 80-20 analysis and negative 80-20 analysis, then I start putting things into the calendar. If it is not in the calendar, it is not real. And I've already started scheduling the fun stuff. And there are a few ways that I've done this. So number one is I almost always do something with my family for Christmas. So that's one extended trip. This year was an exception. We took a year off of that because we want to do it at home. Also, a trip around June or July. Now, why is this important? It's important because with these extended trips, and of course, I'm just pulling a number out of my ass, but I would say 90% of the gift is to yourself and others is the anticipation of the experience. This is why it's so important to schedule and block it out ahead of time. So extended trip mid-year, extended trip at the end of the year. That means you have something to look forward to every 6 months. All right. Now, there are a few reasons that I started doing this. All right. So you're going to put these various trips, these various activities, etc., in the calendar. And one of the reasons I started focusing on these types of in-advance purchases was because I read a book, and I would give it really a 7 out of 10. There are aspects of the book that I perhaps disagree with, but I'll get to that. And the title of the book is Happy Money. All right, Happy Money. Subtitle: The Science of Happier Spending. And this is by Elizabeth Dunn and Michael Norton. And really, it answers the question, can money buy happiness? And the answer is that money is, well, these are my words, necessary but not sufficient in a way for happiness per se. But can you use money to increase your well-being and effectively happiness in different degrees? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So they focus on, I think it's 5 core principles. There are some issues with the social science, observational data, confusing correlation with causation, etc., all of that. But I did find it useful as thinking of a framework. Some of the questions they would ask are, and I know we're jumping around, this is the Danish butter cookies and caffeine in action, but the questions they might ask would include, when you're considering a purchase, how will this affect how I use my time? So for any purchase, how will this affect how I use my time? And that's a good one to write down. This is actually very versatile. Could be something you're considering doing in the future. Could purchasing this and anticipating, enjoying it 6 months from now affect how I use my time now, etc. All right. Next is, how will I use this thing on Tuesday nights? Right? Next Tuesday. How will I use this on Tuesday nights or next Tuesday? And in effect, what you're doing is you're turning decisions of dollars into decisions of time. How purchases will affect how you use your time.